Nathan Grant slowly lowered himself to the ground, his knees aching under the weight of years he never showed in public. The cold sidewalk in downtown Seattle wasn't a place for someone like him, or at least that's what the world believed. His name appeared on the list of the country's wealthiest men, wrapped in rumors and mystery. No one knew exactly how Nathan had built his real estate empire. What was known was that some years ago he had vanished from cameras, from events, from headlines, as if the man had evaporated, leaving only his fortune intact, operating from a distance. Now, there he was, unrecognizable beneath a worn-out coat, barely covering the shabby clothes underneath. His hood was pulled up to shadow his face, and dark glasses hid his watchful eyes. Next to him, a dirty backpack leaned against a rusted pole. He sat against the restaurant's outer wall, feeling the city's energy pulse through the concrete and the ceaseless noise. It was early morning, and the first customers were beginning to approach the restaurant entrance. Rushed couples with coffee cups in hand, executives on phones, tourists consulting maps and GPS, all pass him as if he were invisible. Nathan didn't move. He watched, absorbed. Every averted glance, every furrowed brow, every quickened step past him was part of the experiment. He wanted to see who still noticed. This wasn't Nathan's first time doing something like this, but it was the first time without bodyguards nearby, without contact with his team, without a safety net. There was no one but himself in the city, a city he had helped shape through contracts, acquisitions, and skyscrapers. The restaurant he had chosen was popular among locals, known both for its food and quick service. It was also one of dozens of commercial properties held by one of Nathan's investment funds. Information none of the staff knew. That was part of the test. He had chosen the location with precision, month of observation, internal reports, customer feedback, manager behavior. Nathan wanted to see how the environment treated the invisible, the ones with nothing to offer in return. 20 minutes passed. Nothing. A few people wrinkled their noses as they passed. Others ignored him completely. A child pointed curiously, but the mother quickly pulled a small hand away, picking up her pace. Nathan just observed, his eyes behind the glasses analyzing more than appearances. As the time neared 9 o'clock, staff began arriving. Through the back, from the side, in uniform, rushing. The restaurant would soon be full. Nathan knew the critical moment was close, when he would no longer be simply ignored, but actively rejected. He pulled a half-empty water bottle from his backpack, took a sip, and placed it back. Then he crossed his arms over his chest, adjusted the hood, and leaned more comfortably against the wall. His body ached, but his mind remained sharp. Every detail mattered. Every interaction, or the lack of one, revealed more than any corporate report. Across the street, a man inside a black SUV watched discreetly. He wasn't part of Nathan's security team. In fact, no one nearby knew who he was. The tinted window concealed his face, but a camera on his dashboard was active, recording every second of Nathan's presence on the sidewalk. Inside the restaurant, the staff were getting into position. The smell of coffee mixed with the sound of silverware being placed on tables. The manager hadn't arrived yet, but the waiters and waitresses followed their routines, unaware of the man sitting quietly just outside. For now, Nathan adjusted his hood again and closed his eyes for a few seconds. He took a deep breath. There was something strange about being so close to ordinary life, to the rush of the streets, the disinterest of people. But there was also something necessary. He needed to see. He needed to feel. He needed to remember why he started this in the first place. Because behind the billions, the cold decisions, and the faceless contracts, Nathan was still someone who believed in humanity. And that was what he sought in this silent test. Humanity in the midst of indifference. He opened his eyes when he heard the first voice at the restaurant's front door. An irritated voice, impatient, calling for someone inside. Nathan turned his head slowly, but didn't move. Something was about to happen, and he would be ready to see who, among them all, was still capable of truly seeing. Nathan sat in silence, his posture slightly hunched, the hood of his coat pulled up just enough to shade his face from the bright mid-morning sun. The downtown Seattle streets were alive with their usual symphony of movement. Cars honking, shoes clacking against concrete, and the low hum of chatter from pedestrians passing by. People strode past him with purpose, their eyes glued to phones, hands clutching coffees, not one sparing a glance at the man seated quietly on the sidewalk. His backpack rested beside him like a loyal dog, the frayed straps hinting at a life lived without comfort. He had been there for just under an hour when the first real confrontation began. A tall man in a server's uniform pushed open the glass door of the restaurant and stepped outside with a tray of used dishes in one hand. His name tag read Jason, and he was barely out the door before his eyes landed on Nathan. "You've got to be kidding me," Jason muttered under his breath, shooting a quick glance inside the restaurant before turning back toward Nathan. "Hey, you can't just sit there. This isn't a shelter. People are trying to eat in peace." Nathan remained still, not looking up, not reacting. Jason took a few steps forward, his sneakers squeaking faintly against a wet patch of sidewalk. "I said move along, man," he said louder this time, drawing the attention of two diners seated near the window. "Don't make me call someone." Nathan shifted just slightly, his voice low, almost inaudible. "I'm not bothering anyone." Jason scoffed. "That's not the point. You're sitting right outside the entrance." "Customers don't want to see that," he said, gesturing vaguely at Nathan's clothes. "Go sit somewhere else." The restaurant's door swung open again, this time with far more force, as a sharply dressed woman with a tight bun and a clipboard tucked under her arm stormed out. Karen, the manager, had the clipped tone of someone constantly just moments away from losing her patience. Her heels clicked sharply against the concrete as she approached. "What's going on out here?" she asked Jason, without even looking at Nathan. Jason pointed. "He's camped right outside the door. I told him to leave, but he's not listening." Karen finally turned to Nathan, her expression already set in stone. "Sir, this is private property. I'm going to ask you one time to leave. We can't have loiterers here." Nathan slowly looked up, and for a brief second, Karen hesitated. There was something in his eyes, steadiness, maybe even defiance, but she pushed the thought aside. "I'm not causing any harm," Nathan said softly. Karen took a step closer, her voice dropping to a sharper pitch. "You're making my customers uncomfortable. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. Your presence here is a liability." A small crowd had begun to gather. Diners turned their heads to look through the windows, pedestrians slowing their steps. Jason looked smug. Karen stood firm. Nathan, still seated, looked around at the faces watching him as if memorizing each one. "I'll go," he said, but he didn't move right away. "Now," Karen demanded, folding her arms. "I won't ask again." As Nathan pushed himself to his feet, slow and deliberate, a young couple walking by exchanged whispers and glances. One of them shook his head with a chuckle, muttering. Another one just sitting around begging for attention. Nathan said nothing. He reached for his backpack, slinging it over his shoulder with the ease of someone used to carrying weight. As he turned away, Karen turned back to the restaurant, already dismissing the moment from her mind. Jason was smirking as he followed her in, but not everyone was immune to the discomfort in the air. Inside, near the back of the restaurant, Emily had watched the entire exchange through the window. She had been clearing a table when Jason's voice first rang out, and now she stood frozen, her claws still in hand, her brow furrowed. The customers at her table had paused mid-bite, unsure whether to continue eating or continue watching. One of them finally shrugged and returned to their food, and slowly the tension outside seemed to dissolve as Nathan disappeared from view, his figure swallowed by the flow of pedestrians. Emily turned away from the window and returned to her station, her mind elsewhere. Back outside, Nathan didn't walk far. He rounded the corner and found an alleyway just wide enough for him to rest for a moment, hidden from the view of the restaurant's front windows. He didn't sit this time. Instead, he pulled out a small device from his backpack, about the size of a deck of cards, matte black, with a tiny screen. He tapped a button and the screen flickered to life, displaying a list of connected video feeds. Each one was labeled front entrance, dining room, kitchen, employee hallway. The cameras had worked. Everything had been recorded. He watched a brief clip. Jason's outburst, Karen's arrival, the confrontation. Every face, every word, captured in sharp resolution. He watched until the moment Emily came into frame, pausing at the window, her face conflicted. That was when he stopped the playback. There was something about her hesitation. Not fear, not guilt, just discomfort, maybe even compassion. Nathan powered off the device and slid it back into his backpack. Then he pulled out a notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote one word in large, steady letters. Emily. With that, he closed the notebook, pulled his hood back up, and walked deeper into the alley, his silhouette disappearing into shadow just as the first drops of rain began to fall over downtown Seattle. The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something lingered in the air like smoke after a candle had been blown out. The moment passed, yet for Emily, it echoed louder than any clang of dishes or orders shouted from the kitchen. She moved from table to table, but her eyes drifted to the entrance more than once, as if expecting the man in the tattered coat to reappear, though she knew he would not. It was nearly noon when the dining room hit its peak. Emily balanced plates on each arm, her ponytail bouncing as she maneuvered through the maze of occupied tables. Karen was making her rounds again, stopping to greet the wealthier patrons with a curated smile and making curt comments to the staff under her breath. Jason had resumed his routine, clearly pleased with himself. He leaned against the counter, chatting up another waiter and laughing louder than necessary. At one point, Emily passed by and caught fragments of the conversation. Guy probably hasn't bathed in weeks. Did you see the coat? Might as well have been a trash bag. Jason snorted. Emily stopped short. She turned slightly, just enough to be noticed, then walked to the drink station and began preparing ice water for a table of 4. The water flowed from the tap with a low hiss, and her hand trembled slightly as she set the glass down. Without quite thinking it through, she poured one extra. During a brief lull in the rush, Emily tucked the glass into a to-go cup, wrapped the base in a napkin, and walked quietly toward the side entrance. She slipped outside and scanned the sidewalk. The spot where the man had sat was now just bare concrete, stained faintly from the morning's rain. A group of teenagers passed by, laughing loudly. A delivery man rolled a dolly full of produce crates down the curb, but there was no sign of him. Emily stood for a moment, unsure what she was even doing. Then, almost instinctively, she turned left and followed the edge of the building, rounding the corner until she reached the narrow alleyway that separated the restaurant from the next building. The air was cooler here, the noise of traffic slightly muffled. Garbage bins lined the wall, and steam rose from a grate near the sidewalk. He was not there. She sighed and turned back, then stopped. Someone was watching her. From across the street, half hidden behind the tinted window of a parked car, a pair of eyes followed her every move. The figure inside didn't shift or signal, but Emily felt it, like a prickle on the back of her neck. She glanced at the car again, but before she could be sure, it pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into traffic. She stood in place for another few seconds, cup still in hand. Then she poured the water into the nearest drain and headed back inside. By the time she returned, Karen was waiting. "Where were you?" she asked sharply, arms crossed, lips thin. Emily met her gaze, just stepped out for a second. Karen's eyes flicked to the empty cup. That for a customer? Emily didn't answer. She could have lied. It would have been easy. But instead, she just walked past, returned to counter, and picked up the next ticket. Karen stared after her for a moment, as if deciding how much she wanted to escalate the situation. But in the end, she turned away. Later that afternoon, while clearing a booth near the window, Emily found a crumpled napkin tucked under one of the plates. She almost threw it away without looking, but something about the way it had been folded caught her attention. Carefully, she smoothed it out. In small, deliberate handwriting was a single word. "Thank you." Her eyes widened. She looked around the dining room instinctively, scanning each table and face. But there was no sign of the man from earlier, no sign of anyone unfamiliar. Then, beneath the 2 words, she saw something else. A name, Nathan Grant. She froze. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. It rang in her ears like a half-remembered song lyric. She folded the napkin carefully and slid it into her pocket. She spent the rest of the shift in a strange daze. Everything felt slightly off-center, like the floor had tilted just a few degrees. At one point, Jason bumped into her near the dish station and muttered something sarcastic. but she barely noticed. Her mind kept returning to the handwriting, the way her name had not been used, but the message had still felt personal. As the evening rush wound down and the restaurant began to empty, Emily took a moment to step into the staff bathroom. She locked the door, sat on the closed toilet lid, and pulled out the napkin again. Nathan Grant. She whispered the name aloud. Still nothing concrete came to mind. Not a friend, not a former coworker, but it sounded important. Not common, a name you might see in a headline. Emily pulled out her phone. Her fingers hesitated over the screen, then typed in the name. The search results began to load. She blinked. There it was, at the top of the screen. Nathaniel Grant, often referred to simply as Nathan Grant. Billionaire real estate mogul. Reclusive, rarely photographed. Rumors of philanthropic projects. Multiple business holdings. One of the most powerful private developers on the West Coast. Emily stared at the screen, mouth slightly open. She scrolled through the articles. Photos were scarce, and the few that existed were old, business suits, boardroom meetings, distant shots from charity galas. But it was him. It was a man who had sat on the sidewalk that morning, coat torn, hair tangled, face shadowed. She gripped the phone tighter, her breath catching. What was a billionaire doing sitting outside a mid-range restaurant in disguise? Why had he given her his name? Why had he thanked her for something so small? Before she could begin to process any of it, a loud knock sounded on the bathroom door. Emily. It was Karen. We close in 10. Let's go. Emily quickly stuffed the napkin back into her pocket and stood. As she left the bathroom and clocked out, her eyes flicked to the security camera in the corner of the hallway. Its little red light blinked steadily. Unseen by her, in an office far from that building, a screen was capturing every frame. The following morning, the mood inside the restaurant had shifted. The staff moved with a kind of nervous energy, like they sensed something brewing beneath the surface. Karen arrived earlier than usual, her heels echoing down the tile hallway as she marched toward the manager's office. Jason was already behind the counter, sipping a large iced coffee and sharing a joke with another server when Emily walked in. She clocked in quietly and tied her apron, her eyes darting to the security camera in the corner. Though it looked like every other cheap surveillance setup, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be watching. Someone with a reason. Her thoughts were interrupted by Karen's voice blaring over the intercom, summoning her to the office. Emily wiped her hands on her apron and made her way back. When she stepped inside, Karen didn't offer her a seat. The room smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. The blinds were drawn, and the computer monitor was already loaded with grainy footage from the previous day. Karen clicked play. There was no audio, but the image was clear enough. Emily, stepping outside to the side door, a cup of water in hand. A long pause. Then she returned, empty-handed. Karen folded her arms. Do you want to explain this to me? Emily stayed quiet for a second too long. Then she said, I brought him water. Karen raised an eyebrow. You brought who water? Emily didn't look away. The man outside. Karen leaned back in her chair and sighed dramatically. So let me get this straight. After everything that happened yesterday, after Jason told him to leave, after I told him to leave, you took it upon yourself to serve him? I didn't serve him, Emily said calmly. I gave him water. That's not illegal. That's not the point, Karen snapped. We have rules. You don't get to make judgment calls about who deserves service. He wasn't a customer. He wasn't even supposed to be on the property. Emily clenched her jaw. He wasn't hurting anyone. Karen stood up now, moving around the desk, so she was face to face with her. Let me make something very clear. This is not a soup kitchen. This is a business. We don't hand out drinks to people loitering on the sidewalk because it makes you feel good. Emily didn't back down. It wasn't about me feeling good. It was basic human decency. There was a silence between them. Thick, tense. Karen finally crossed her arms. I'm docking your pay for yesterday's shift, and this is your formal warning. One more act of insubordination, and you're out. Understood. Emily took a step back, fists clenched, but her voice remained steady. I won't apologize for it. Karen's lips tightened. Then don't. Just remember, next time, there are no second chances. Emily turned and walked out of the office without another word. Back in the dining room, Jason was already aware of what had happened. He gave her a long, mocking look as she passed him. "Careful, Emily," he said, voice just loud enough for her to hear. "You might end up out there next to your new friend." She didn't answer him. She didn't even look at him. She went straight to her assigned tables, the napkin with the name still folded deep in her pocket. The name now carrying a weight she hadn't fully grasped until last night. Throughout her shift, she moved with purpose, but the tension was impossible to ignore. A few of the other waitstaff whispered when they thought she wasn't looking. Even the kitchen crew seemed colder than usual. Only Maria, one of the older servers who had been working there for over a decade, offered her a silent, supportive glance. Emily returned it with a weak smile. Just before the end of her shift, while sweeping under a booth, she heard her name again, soft, hesitant. It was one of the new hires, a college-age hostess named Lily. "I heard what happened," Lily said, barely above a whisper. "You were just trying to help. That's not wrong." Emily looked at her and offered a nod. "Thanks." Lily hesitated, then added, "You know they record everything here, right? Even the break room." Emily blinked. "They record the break room?" Lily nodded. "Karen says it's for safety, but I heard from one of the line cooks that everything gets backed up to corporate, even stuff from months ago." Emily didn't know what to say. Her instinct told her this wasn't just about a cup of water anymore. After clocking out, she lingered at the corner where she had last seen Nathan, or whoever he really was. But the alleyway was empty again, just like the day before. She walked home in the soft drizzle of a Pacific Northwest afternoon, the city gray and moody around her, and tried to make sense of it all. When she got to her apartment, she dropped her keys in the dish near the door and collapsed on the couch, pulling out the napkin again. The handwriting looked more purposeful now. Less like a message, more like an invitation. Or a challenge. She opened her laptop and stared at the search results again, scrolling through news articles about Nathan Grant, his rise in the real estate world, the projects he had funded, the private islands he had allegedly purchased. But there was almost nothing personal. No interviews. No public appearances in years. He was a ghost billionaire, moving in shadows. What was he doing outside her restaurant? And why had he written only his name? She clicked on one article from 3 years ago, the silent visionary behind Seattle's new skyline. There was a quote from a former assistant that caught her eye. "Nathan believes in observing people when they think no one's watching. He always said the truth doesn't reveal itself under spotlights, but in the quiet, thankless moments." She stared at those words for a long time. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A new text. A known number. "I saw what you did. Thank you." Her chest tightened. She typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came seconds later. "You already know." She read it twice, then 3 times, but before she could respond, the typing bubble appeared again. "Don't trust everyone inside that restaurant." The message was followed by a map pin, just coordinates, pointing to a location less than 3 miles away. Emily hesitated, heart pounding. She checked the address. It was a public park, one she'd been to before. She didn't know if she was walking into something she should be afraid of, or something that would finally explain everything. But as she grabbed her jacket and left her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it was only just beginning. The rain had stopped, but the sky over Seattle remained a heavy slate gray. Emily zipped her coat up to her neck as she walked briskly through the city streets, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, eyes locked on the blue, navigating toward the location she had been sent. The streets were quieter now, late enough that most families were already home, dinner plates clinking behind closed apartment windows. The coordinates led her to a small public park she recognized from weekend strolls. It was modest, mostly grass and a few old trees, with benches placed irregularly along a looping walking path. A cracked fountain stood at the center, long dried and now littered with leaves. She scanned the area as she entered, her footsteps soft on the wet pavement. Only 2 other people were in sight, a man walking a dog near the far entrance and a jogger stretching by a lamppost. Neither paid her any attention. She kept walking until her phone buzzed again. Sit on the bench near the fountain. Emily turned toward the dry fountain and spotted the bench directly in front of it. Her heart hammered in her chest as she made her way over. The damp was creaking slightly as she sat down. She checked her surroundings again, but nothing had changed. She waited in silence for several minutes. Just as her nerves were starting to twist into something more urgent, she heard a soft, measured step behind her. She turned. It was him, not in the tattered coat, not in disguise. This time, he wore a tailored charcoal gray overcoat, his posture upright, his presence commanding despite the modest setting. His eyes met hers calmly as he approached and took a seat on the far end of the bench. She stared at him, struggling to match the man before her with the image of supposed billionaire she had seen online. It was unmistakably the same person, and yet everything about him radiated control and intention, completely unlike the quiet figure who had sat on the sidewalk 2 days earlier. "You came," he said. Emily hesitated. "Of course I did. You sent me a message. How could I not?" He nodded, gazing straight ahead at the empty fountain. "Most wouldn't have." "I don't even know who you really are," she said. "Yes, you do," he replied, almost gently. "You looked me up. You know my name. That was all I wanted to give you at first. Something to make you ask questions." Emily shifted on the bench, the fabric of her coat rustling. "You're Nathan Grant, but you weren't just there by accident. You were watching us. Watching me. Why?" He took a moment before responding, choosing his words with care. "I've spent the last 6 months visiting my own properties. Restaurants, hotels, residential buildings. Places I own, but rarely see from the ground level. I wanted to understand how people behave when power isn't in the room, when they think no one important is watching." She studied his face, searching for signs of deceit, arrogance, anything that would expose some ulterior motive. But what she saw was something far more disarming. Conviction. "You were pretending to be homeless," she said quietly. "I wasn't pretending," he corrected. "I was homeless. For 4 days. No phone, no contact with my staff. I slept in alleyways. I ate what I could find. And I sat outside that restaurant to see what would happen." Emily stared at the fountain. The silence between them was weighty. "You wanted to see if anyone would help you." He gave a small nod. "I wanted to see if anyone would see me." She shook her head, not in disbelief, but in quiet anger. "Do you know how dangerous that is? What if someone hurt you? What if no one came to help you?" Nathan turned slightly toward her. "That's the point. I needed to understand the reality of what people experience when they have nothing. And I needed to know how the people under my employment would react to that reality." Emily folded her arms across her chest. "So, what did you find?" His gaze locked with hers. "I found you." A pause passed between them. Then she asked, "Why me?" "You did something no one else did," he said. "You saw someone in pain and responded with kindness. No agenda, no audience, just a moment of decency. That matters more to me than any resume, any business pitch, any donation check." Emily didn't know how to respond to that. Her instinct screamed that this wasn't just about what had happened. Something deeper was in motion, something bigger. "So what now?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. He held it out to her. "What is it?" she asked, taking it cautiously. "Something for you to read. Not here, not now, but soon." Emily looked down at the envelope. Her name was written in neat, precise handwriting across the front. Emily Carson. She looked back up at him. "You knew my full name before I told you." He nodded. "I did some research after that day. Not just about you, but about everyone at the restaurant. I had to understand the environment, the people. I saw everything." Her mind flashed to the surveillance cameras, the conversations, the incident with Karen in the office. Everything. "Yes." Emily sat back, stunned. "So that's why you warned me not to trust everyone." "I can't tell you who to trust," Nathan said. "But I can tell you this. Someone inside that place is not who they pretend to be. And things are going to get worse before they get better." He stood. "Wait," she said, rising to her feet. You can't just disappear again. I won't, he said. But for now, you have a choice to make. Read the letter. Think about what you want from your future. Not just at that job, but beyond it. She held the envelope tightly in her hand. Are you offering me something? In a way, he said, but you'll understand more when you open it. Without another word, he walked away, disappearing into fog that had begun to settle over the park. Emily stood alone for a long time, listening to the distant rumble of the city, the envelope still warm from his hand. She sat back down on the bench, unsure whether the weight in her chest was excitement or dread. When she finally got home that night, she didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, she placed it on her kitchen counter and stared at it as she made tea, fed her cat, and changed out of her damp clothes. It was only after she had curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her legs and the room dimly lit, that she reached for it again. She broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality paper, typed, not handwritten. It was not a job offer. It was an invitation. You are one of 3 people who passed the test. A test of character, of empathy, of instinct. In the coming weeks, I will ask something of you. You are not obligated to say yes. But if you do, be prepared to leave everything behind. What lies ahead is not a job. It's a purpose. Beneath the message, there was a phone number. No signature. No further instructions. Emily held the paper in her hands for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and placed it back into the envelope. She didn't know what she would decide. Not yet, but something told her the world she had known was already starting to fall away. The morning light filtered to the blinds in Emily's apartment, painting soft stripes across the floor. The envelope lay untouched on her kitchen table, a silent testament to the choice she still had not made. She stared at it for a long while, then finally stood and made herself ready for work, as though nothing unusual had happened. When she arrived at the restaurant, the air was thick. The employees seemed tense, more than usual, and Karen had already begun barking orders before the doors even opened. Emily moved silently behind the counter, putting on her apron and checking her station. She had not opened the envelope yet. She didn't trust herself to behave normally if she did. 10 minutes after opening, Jason slid a clipboard across to her. Shift change papers, he muttered. Sign here. Emily took it without looking. Karen appeared at her elbow, eyes cold. You're late, she snapped. And Mr. Harper called complaining about the lack of staff coverage last night. Was your shift not filled? Emily swallowed. I'm sorry. I was delayed. She signed the form anyway. It won't happen again. Karen bent close. Her voice dropped. Don't make me enforce penalties. She straightened and walked away, leaving Emily to feel the weight of her warning. As the day wore on, Emily noticed something odd. One of the regular customers, a middle-aged man who came almost daily for lunch, glanced at her suspiciously more than once. He rubbed his chin, glanced at the camera in the corner, at Karen, then at Emily. She tried to go about her tasks without minding him, but his eyes felt heavy on her back. During a lull between lunch and dinner, she stepped into the staff lounge to get water, and the envelope caught her gaze from her jacket pocket. She held it, thumb brushing the edge. Before she could pull it out, Lily slipped in behind her. You okay? Lily asked, glancing at the envelope. You look tired. Emily drifted to a seat and Saturday. I have something I need to do later. Something outside of here. Lily's expression went cautious. You know, you should be careful. Karen's got ears everywhere now. She already pulled me aside last week. Told me she didn't trust me with extra shifts because she caught me talking quietly after hours. Emily nodded. She watches everything. She glanced at the envelope again. I need to figure this out, but not here. Lily sat across from her. If you ever need someone to watch your back. Emily offered a weak smile. Thanks, Lily. Suddenly, the lounge door swung open and Karen marched in, arms crossed. The color drained from Lily's face. She slid out without a word. Karen's eyes locked on Emily. You two talking back there? She demanded. Emily shook her head, standing. No, ma'am. Just resting. Karen stared at the room. Good. Because I don't tolerate backroom conspiracies. She turned sharply and left, leaving Emily shaken. Back in the dining area, Emily took her shift and moved from table to table, but her mind kept drifting. She wondered who in that restaurant was truly loyal, who was watching, what motives lay beneath smiles and conversation. That evening, after the dinner rush died down, Karen called Emily into the office again. This time, the district manager accompanied her, a tall, stern woman named Vanessa Reed. The office felt colder, with Vanessa present. Her arms were clasped behind her back. She watched quietly as Karen spoke. "We've received complaints from corporate about your conduct," Karen began. "It's alleged that you encouraged a loiterer to linger, that you insubordinately acted outside your duties. This is not appropriate behavior. Our brand's image is being questioned." Vanessa nodded. "These are serious accusations, Emily Carson. We had reports that you interfered with the staff's orders, that you attempted to provide water to a non-customer. We must look at this matter thoroughly, or face consequences from higher up." Emily swallowed hard. I've never broken rules intentionally. My intention was to humanely treat a person who seemed in need." Karen's lip curled. "That's exactly the problem. Intentions don't matter when protocol is broken." Vanessa flipped through a folder. "Given these violations, we are placing you on unpaid leave, pending further review. You are not to enter this establishment until the situation is resolved." Emily's heart twisted. "Unpaid leave? But I can't." Vanessa cut her off. "This is not negotiable. You leave now." Emily stood, disoriented. She looked at Karen, but the manager's face was stony. She thought of the envelope in her jacket pocket, the name of Nathan Grant, the invitation, the warning. She stepped out of the office, head held high despite the storm inside her. Jason watched as she walked by. He said nothing. Lily stood behind him, eyes filled with pity. Emily offered a brief nod and gathered her things. As she passed the host stand, she heard murmurs from customers. Some looked sympathetic. Many did not. Outside, the night air felt sharp. She drew in a breath. She had always lived paycheck to paycheck. This job mattered. It wasn't just income, it was stability. And now it was gone. She walked down the sidewalk, boots clicking, her mind racing. She glanced back at the restaurant. The windows glowed warmly. Inside, figures moved. She forced herself to move forward. She tried to reach someone, her landlord, a friend, any safety net. But by the time she got home, she found a yellow envelope stuck under her door. Her name was printed on it, crisp and exact. She picked it up, hands trembling, and slipped inside. Inside was another note, typed on the same high-quality paper. "Meet me tonight at 9. Dockside, Pier 23. Come alone. Bring nothing but courage." Her breath caught. Why was this man drawing her deeper? Into danger, into mystery. Was it confidence or recklessness? She looked around her small apartment. Her bed, her microwave, the peeling paint, the narrow hallway. Everything felt too constraining now. Something larger was pulling. Something beyond her routine. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the note, reading it multiple times. The words formed echoes in her mind. Courage, alone, Dockside Pier. The meeting place was not a park this time. It was the waterfront. She knew the area. It was somewhat isolated at night, docks and shipping containers, with occasional security patrols. Not a place for a woman to walk alone after dark. Yet her heart pulsed with a strange determination. The puzzle pieces were aligning. The fired, the envelope, the illusion, the offer, everything pointed to that waterfront meeting. She stood and moved to her bedroom window. The city lights glowed. The distant sound of Seattle's waterfront, ships, horns, water against piers, drifted in. She exhaled. By 9 o'clock, Emily had dressed in black pants and a jacket with pockets. She took nothing but her phone and the acceptance that whatever awaited her, she was ready. She left her apartment, locking the door behind her, feeling each click of the bolt as a final seal. She walked through quiet streets, half-dimmed streetlights leading her path toward the docks. The night air was salty. Ships moored not far. The pier numbering loomed. Pier 23 was easy to find. at the very water's edge, flanked by warehouses and shipping crates. She reached the end of the pier and paused. The wooden planks creaked beneath her boots. The moon was hidden behind clouds. The only light came from a distant crane and scattered lamps on the pier. Someone was there, leaning against a crate. The figure stepped forward, and Emily recognized him immediately. Nathan Grant. He looked different again, less formal than in the park, but still composed, intense. He held a flashlight in one hand and a folder in the other. "You came," he said quietly. She nodded. "You asked." He gestured toward the edge of the pier. "Walk with me." They moved together along the planks, their footsteps echoing. The water lapped just beneath the boards. A distant ship horn sounded like an exhale. Nathan stopped near a large crate and placed a folder on top. "You've been suspended," he said bluntly. I saw the notice come through corporate. Emily's heart lurched. "You can't stop that." He glanced at her. "No, but I might be able to help you. You deserve better than waiting tables while sacrificing morals." He pushed open the folder. Inside were papers, contracts, financial statements, proposals. He turned them toward her. "This is what I want to do. I want to build a nonprofit to uplift people who are overlooked, marginalized. But I can't just throw money at problems. I need someone who acts on principle without knowing there is a payoff." She looked down at the stack. "Why me?" "Because you were one of only 3 people I saw act when you thought no one would see. You didn't ask questions. You didn't try to get reward. You did something kind when it cost you. That matters more than credentials." She let the words sink in. Then Nathan added, his voice low, "But there's a complication. I believe someone inside that restaurant is working against us. Someone is leaking information to my rivals. Someone is hoping this venture fails. That's why I asked you to leave. I needed to protect you until we know who to trust." Emily's mind spun. Betrayal from within. Power games. A test of character that had real consequences. She stepped closer to the crate. "So this was more than a test." Nathan nodded. "Much more. That napkin with your name. It was only the beginning. The letter. The messages. They were all to see if you would step forward. And when you did, I needed to remove interference before offering something real." She looked at the waterfront, the dark water shimmering, then back at him. "And you think I can help?" He studied her. "I want you to help lead this nonprofit. But before that, you must decide, will you trust me with your name, your reputation, your life?" The night wind whispered. Emily could hear her own heartbeat faintly in her ears. She inhaled. "Yes," she said softly, though in her mind the word felt like a decision more than an answer. She didn't know all the risks. She didn't know how far this would go. But she knew one thing. She would not walk away now that she had been seen. Nathan nodded once. He gently handed her a contract from the folder. "Sign this. It binds you not to me as employer, but to the mission, and then I will guide you." Emily took the pen. She signed, tearing off the top sheet and slipping it into her jacket. When she looked up, the pier behind her was silent, the water lapping and Nathan watching. They stood together at the edge, the darkness around them full of possibilities and dangers. She didn't know how this would end. She only knew she had made her choice. The next morning, the apartment felt eerily quiet, as though something had shifted permanently overnight. Emily sat at the kitchen table, the signed contract still folded in her coat pocket, the weight of its promise a constant reminder that she was no longer who she had been the day before. She had not slept. Her mind had churned through every possible outcome: loss, discovery, the risk of stepping into something much larger than herself. And yet, beneath the anxiety, there was also clarity. She stood, grabbed her phone, and dialed the number Nathan had included in the contract folder. It rang once before being picked up. "Emily," said a calm voice. It wasn't Nathan's. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "This is Alan Chun. I handle security and intelligence for Mr. Grant. He asked me to expect your call." Emily paused. "Okay. We'll begin the vetting process today. We've already initiated background scans on all restaurant personnel. I'll send a secure email where you can submit a detailed report. Anything you've noticed, conversations, behavior shifts, unexplained access to internal systems. Emily nodded, instinctively switching into alert mode. I already have a few names. We'll cross-check everything. Your safety is our priority. If anything feels wrong, you call this number. No delays. She agreed, and the call ended. Within minutes, she received the encrypted email address. She spent the next hour compiling everything she could remember. Karen's evasiveness, Jason's strange conversations, the way Corpora arrived without warning, and even her suspicion that the cameras were being used for more than just surveillance. She included details about the customer who had watched her too closely and the timing of her suspension. She held nothing back. After sending the file, she opened her laptop again, this time searching through articles and staff reviews related to the restaurant. Hidden between comment about food and service were old complaints, mentions of mismanagement, rumors of staff being replaced without notice, and most notably, hints that the restaurant's ownership had changed hands twice in the last 2 years. One of the names listed in the old records triggered something in her memory. Charles Dempsey. She searched the name further. It didn't take long to uncover more. Charles had once been a regional executive for a competing restaurant chain, one that had attempted to expand into Grant-owned properties, but was blocked by Nathan's legal team after a failed acquisition. Charles had gone quiet for a while, but now, according to recent financial reports, he was back in business, this time through silent partnerships in lower-profile hospitality ventures. Emily cross-referenced the name with the corporate entity that oversaw her restaurant's operations, and there it was, a holding group registered under an alias that tied back to one of Dempsey's shell companies. Her stomach turned. She emailed Alan again. Within 10 minutes, he called her back. "Excellent work," he said. "We've suspected Dempsey's involvement, but your confirmation narrows the scope. It means someone on the inside is actively funneling data, performance metrics, employee behavior, security footage to an outside rival." Emily's voice was tight. "Then it wasn't just about me giving someone water. They used that incident to push me out before I could see too much." "Exactly," Alan confirmed. "Your empathy made you a threat. They didn't count on you being connected to Nathan Grant. What happens now? We'll continue monitoring. But this is where you come in, Emily. Nathan doesn't just want you to observe. He wants you to act. That means building the foundation for something new, right under their noses." Emily leaned back in her chair, the implications slowly setting in. "You mean, start organizing a nonprofit now?" "Yes," Alan said, "but you won't be doing it from the outside. Nathan has already begun reallocating funds, and he's reviewing locations for your headquarters. You'll be meeting the other 2 candidates this week. You'll lead together." The idea filled her with a strange mixture of fear and strength. By afternoon, a black SUV arrived outside her apartment. A woman stepped out, sharp suit, discreet earpiece, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Carson?" she asked. "I'm Claire. Mr. Grant asked me to escort you." Emily climbed into the vehicle, and they drove through the city, weaving away from downtown until they reached an office building on the outskirts. The top floor had been renovated into a modern suite. Glass walls, soft lighting, wide desks, and a view of the skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was beautiful, calming, and entirely unlike the chaos of her previous job. "This will be your temporary command center," Claire explained. "We're calling it Haven. The nonprofit will serve unhoused populations in the region with job placement, mental health access, and transitional housing. You'll oversee partnerships, design outreach programs, and hire the initial team." Emily moved through the space like someone dreaming. "Nathan believes in testing quietly, then building loudly," Claire continued. "You'll be building the loud part." For the rest of the day, Emily was introduced to 3 assistants, shown budgeting tools, and given access to files that outlined preliminary plans for the nonprofit. It was overwhelming, but in a way that filled her with purpose. She stayed well into the evening, combing through proposals and drafting initial goals. Just after sunset, Claire returned with a message. "Mr. Grant will see you now." Emily followed her through a private elevator that opened into a wide penthouse. Nathan stood near the windows, hands in his pockets, eyes on the city below. "You're adjusting quickly," he said without turning. "I'm trying," she replied. He turned to face her. "You've already uncovered more than I expected in one day. That's why I chose you." Emily nodded. "It's a lot, but it feels right." Nathan walked toward the table in the center of the room. On it sat a tablet, displaying internal reports from the restaurant. He gestured for her to sit. "You're going to rebuild what they tried to destroy," he said. "But I need you to do more than that. I need you to become the kind of leader who makes it impossible for people like Dempsey to hide." She looked at him. "And what if I fail?" Nathan's voice was steady. "Then you fail with integrity. But I don't think you will." She studied the reports on the screen: financial losses, manipulation of staff records, intentional sabotage. Her anger stirred, but deeper than that, her resolve began to harden. "Then let's begin," she said. Nathan smiled faintly and turned back to the window. And Emily knew that the woman who had once hesitated before offering water to a stranger was gone. In her place was someone willing to fight for justice, for dignity, for the unseen. The first week in Side Haven was a whirlwind. Emily threw herself into planning stages with an intensity that surprised even her. There were meetings with local shelters, interviews with potential staff, calls with city officials, and hours spent outlining programs that would soon support hundreds of people transitioning from homelessness to stable jobs. Her phone barely left her hand. Her meals were rushed, and sleep came in fragments, but her purpose was unshakable. But then, like a crack running beneath the surface, trouble began to stir. It started with a delay in the funding transfer Nathan's team had promised. At first, Claire brushed it off as a minor clerical issue. Emily didn't worry. Delays were common in large operations, especially those starting from scratch. But when the delay extended into several days and key partners began to hesitate without confirmation of funds, a sense of unease crept into her chest. She voiced her concern during a briefing with Nathan. He listened intently, then handed the matter off to Alan, who assured her they would resolve it quickly. Still, she noticed Nathan's expression tighten, not with panic, but with a focus she hadn't seen before. The following morning, she arrived at the office to find Claire waiting for her with a concerned look. "There's something you need to see," she said, leading Emily to a conference room. On the screen was a video clip pulled from a news broadcast. Local waitress suspended after confrontation with homeless man. Restaurant security footage leaked. The anchor announced. The screen cut to a heavily edited clip. Emily stepping out the side door, handing a cup to someone off-screen, then the interior footage showing Karen reprimanding her. The segment painted Emily as a rebellious employee causing disruptions and disregarding safety protocol. There was no mention of the man's identity and no context for the interaction. "This was leaked to the press overnight," Claire said grimly. "We believe Dempsey's team had access to internal files before we could lock them out." Emily's mouth went dry. This makes me look like I was unstable." Claire nodded. "They're trying to undermine your public credibility before Haven is fully operational." Emily stepped away from the screen. "What about the donors? The people we're working with?" "Some have paused communication. Others are requesting statements. It's not a total collapse, but it's damage." Emily felt the ground shift beneath her. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but she had never imagined being at the center of a calculated attack. She returned to her desk and sat in silence for several minutes. The contract, the commitment, the mission, it was all now burdened by public perception, twisted by those who had never even looked her in the eye. But the day's blows were not over. When she returned to her apartment that evening, she noticed the eviction notice taped to her door. "Final warning. Payment overdue." She stood motionless in the hallway, her keys frozen in her hand. She had been so focused on a nonprofit, so absorbed in Nathan's mission, that she had barely remembered her own rent was due. And without her income from the restaurant, and with the delays in her new payroll, she was now officially out of time. Inside, she collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, the weight of the week pressed down on her chest. Her apartment was not luxurious, but it had been hers, a symbol of independence, safety. Now it felt like a shell, one wrong word away from being taken away completely. She picked up her phone and hesitated. Pride warred with necessity. Then she called Nathan. He answered on the second ring. "I saw the broadcast," he said before she could speak. "I'm sorry. I didn't think they'd move so fast," she said, voice raw. "They're trying to bury you before you have a voice," Nathan replied. "It's what they've done to others before. We'll respond." "There's more," she added, swallowing hard. "I'm being evicted. I can't afford rent. My account's almost empty." There was a pause. "Pack a bag. You'll stay in one of my properties until this passes. I didn't tell you this to get rescued." "You're not being rescued," he said. "You're being protected so you can keep fighting." An hour later, a car picked her up and brought her to a modest guest house on the edge of the city. It wasn't extravagant, one-bedroom, small kitchen, old oak floors, but it was warm, stocked with food, and most importantly, safe. That night, she stood at the window and looked out at the dark trees beyond. Her life had changed faster than she'd ever thought possible. From an anonymous waitress to a woman at the heart of a battle between billionaires, truth, and corporate manipulation. It was surreal, and now she was at a turning point. She could walk away, find another job, rebuild quietly, let the memory fade. But she knew that would never satisfy her. Instead, she powered up her laptop, logged into the secure system Alan had set up, and began drafting Haven's first public letter. It was a message not from Nathan Grant's foundation, but from her, Emily Carson. She wrote about the truth behind the viral video, her choice to offer water to someone in need, and how she had been punished not for breaking rules, but for seeing a person others chose to ignore. She detailed her suspension, the smear campaign, and most of all, the purpose that had grown from that day, a nonprofit built on dignity, not PR. She saved the document, sent it to Alan and Nathan for review, and then sat back, waiting for the fallout. Hours later, Alan replied. One word. Approved. By dawn, the letter would go live. Her face, her name, and her truth would be in front of the same public who had seen only a distorted version of her the day before. She didn't sleep, but for the first time in days, she didn't feel afraid. Somewhere across town, in a darkened office lit only by the glow of monitors, Charles Dempsey watched the campaign he had orchestrated unfold. His lips curled in frustration as news of Emily's counterstatement reached him. He hadn't expected her to push back so soon, or with such clarity. "She's not backing down," his assistant muttered. Dempsey narrowed his eyes. "Then we'll just push harder." But even he knew, the more they pushed, the more attention they drew. And attention was something Emily Carson had finally learned to command. The next battle had already begun. By the time the sun began to rise, Emily's statement had already spread across digital platforms. Her words, simple, raw, and uncompromising, resonated far beyond the original scandal. Major media outlets picked up the letter, not as gossip, but as a human story. A growing chorus of voices began to question the motivations behind her suspension, and the edited video that sparked the controversy. In Haven's temporary command center, Emily arrived early, carrying a quiet intensity. She no longer felt like an imposter in that sleek glass office. She belonged to the mission now, and today she would prove it. Claire greeted her with a nod and handed her a folder. Press requests are flooding in. Interviews, podcast invitations, speaking panels. People want to hear more. Emily flipped through the list without comment. "We'll do one. Just one. Controlled. Live." Claire smiled faintly. "You sure you're ready for that?" "I don't think I'll ever feel ready," Emily replied. "But I'm sure I have to do it anyway." She spent most of the morning preparing her talking points, crafting language that stayed true to the mission but avoided sounding defensive. Claire and Alan helped screen the options and secured a prime slot on a nationally syndicated webcast known for its fairness and reach. Later that afternoon, with lights set up in a small room and a producer guiding her remotely through a headset, Emily sat before the camera, composed and clear-eyed. The host smiled through the screen. "Emily Carson, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for giving me the space to speak directly." The questions were direct but fair. Emily walked the line between personal story and broader advocacy with remarkable poise. When asked what she hoped people would take from the incident, Her answer landed with a resonance that none of Nathan's staff had anticipated. "I want people to understand that this isn't about me being brave or special," she said. "It's about what happens when someone does the right thing, and the world tries to punish them for it. I didn't plan to become a symbol. I just saw a human being and responded. But now that I've been handed this platform, I won't waste it." The interview ended with quiet applause from the production team. Alan sent her a brief text just minutes later. "It's working." Still, not all battles were won in the public eye. Later that evening, as she returned to the guest house, Emily noticed a car parked just down the block. Dark windows, engine running. Her instincts prickled. She walked slowly, pretending not to notice, but her mind began cataloging possibilities. The surveillance teams Nathan had warned her about, Dempsey's people watching her movements. Inside the house, she drew the curtains and checked the doors. She wasn't frightened, but she was alert now, conscious of how exposed her life had become. She returned to her laptop and began digging deeper into the web of names and entities tied to the restaurant, cross-referencing Nathan's property records, public filings, and archived articles. That's when something unexpected caught her attention. An old interview from nearly a decade ago. A young reporter had profiled Nathan Grant in the early days of his rise. Buried in the article was a passing mention of a project he had tried to launch in the Pacific Northwest, a mixed-use housing development designed to integrate low-income and transitional housing with middle-class units. The project had been blocked by city council pressure and real estate lobbyists. The name of one of the primary lobbyists opposing the initiative? Charles Dempsey. Emily leaned back, stunned. It had all started earlier than she thought. The rivalry wasn't just financial. It was ideological. Nathan had tried to build something humane in a system designed for profit, and Dempsey had made sure it never happened. Now, years later, the battlefield had shifted, but the war was the same. She printed the article and highlighted the key sections. The more she read, the more she understood. This wasn't just a business competition. It was retaliation. Dempsey had failed to block Nathan's influence directly, so he infiltrated one of his most vulnerable spaces, the ground-level businesses Nathan rarely supervised personally. That meant this was more than a coincidence. The restaurant had been chosen for a reason. She picked up the phone and called Alan. "I found something," she said without greeting. Dempsey opposed a housing initiative Nathan proposed 10 years ago. He's been watching since then. Alan was silent for a moment. "I'll verify." That gives us motive. If Dempsey has been tracking Nathan's project for years, he's likely inserted assets into other properties too. We'll start full audits. Emily's mind was already moving forward. What if he's not just trying to ruin Nathan? What if he's trying to steal the model and replicate it as his own? Alan didn't answer immediately. Then we're running out of time. They hung up. Emily returned to her table, printed the records, and began constructing a timeline of every known interference. Dempsey shell companies, employee transfers, suspicious audits, and public discrediting attempts. It painted a picture of long-term sabotage, slow and methodical. The puzzle that began with a crumpled napkin had now expanded into something sprawling and complex. And Emily, once just a quiet waitress, was now the only person connecting the threads. Later that night, as she stood on the balcony of the guest house, looking out over the dark streets, she thought again about that first moment when she handed a cup of water to a man sitting alone on a curb. She hadn't known he was Nathan Grant. She hadn't known anyone was watching. And yet, that moment had opened a door, one she had now walked through fully. Behind her, her phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. "Meet me tomorrow morning. No cameras. No team. Just us. I need to show you something." She stared at the message, her pulse steady. Whatever was coming, she was ready. The sky was still overcast the next morning when Emily stepped out of the guest house, dressed in dark slacks and a navy blouse, hair pulled back, eyes alert. The streets were quiet, dew clinging to the grass along the sidewalks. A black car waited for her at the curb. She recognized the driver, silent professional, one of Nathan's personal security detail. No questions were asked as she stepped inside. No words were spoken during the ride. They drove not to Haven or to one of Nathan's other properties, but toward a part of the city she didn't recognize immediately. They passed a familiar sheen of downtown and the edges of gentrified neighborhoods, slipping deeper into an industrial area marked by warehouses, construction sites, and forgotten lots. The car pulled into a gated property without signage, an old manufacturing building, long abandoned, with rusted siding and boarded-up windows. But the inside told a different story. Once past the heavy doors, the warehouse opened into a clean, high-ceilinged space filled with digital equipment, monitors, white bars covered in notes, and a long glass table at the center. Surveillance footage looped silently on one wall, various feeds from Nathan's properties. A small group of people worked in silence at computer terminals. One of them looked up, nodded to Emily, and went back to work. Nathan was waiting by the table, dressed casually for once, black jeans, gray sweater, and no visible entourage. He gave her a nod as she approached. "You wanted to meet privately," Emily said. "I needed you to see what's at stake," he replied. He gestured toward the table, where a large touchscreen displayed a sprawling map of the city. Colored markers indicated different locations. Emily leaned in. "These are my active properties," Nathan explained. "Restaurants, apartment buildings, transitional housing units, shelters. And these," he tapped red markers, "are the ones that have been compromised in the past 18 months. Emily stared. Nearly a third of the map was marked in red. "It started slowly," he continued. "Bad hires, property damage, financial discrepancies, staff turnover. But when we traced it back, the same pattern repeated. Someone inside each location feeding intel to competitors. Some businesses collapsed. Others barely survived." "Dempsey," Emily said softly. Nathan nodded. "He's not just attacking my holdings. He's trying to prove something. That empathy is weakness. That community investment is bad business. He wants to destroy the model, so no one else will dare replicate it." Emily studied the patterns. "Why now?" "Because Haven is different. It's not just an idea. It's infrastructure. Public. Scalable. And if it works, it will undermine his entire empire." Emily folded her arms. "So what do we do?" "We go public," Nathan said, "but not with accusations. With undeniable proof." He handed her a file from the table. Inside were transcripts, bank statements, employee contracts, hidden camera stills. Every piece of evidence gathered through months of quiet observation. "This is what we've built quietly," he said. "Now it's time to speak loudly." Emily scanned the documents. "This is enough to take him down." "It is," Nathan said, "but it has to come from you." She looked up. "Why me?" "Because I'm the billionaire who disappeared from the public eye. My motives are always questioned. But you, people believe you. They watch your journey. You represent what this fight is really about." Emily nodded slowly. "So what happens next?" Nathan turned toward the screen. "We confront him. Publicly. Today." She blinked. "What do you mean, today?" He smiled slightly. "I own the building where your old restaurant operates. Dempsey doesn't know I've been back on site. He thinks he's still hidden. But this afternoon, during peak lunch hour, I'm walking into the front door with you and revealing who I am, with cameras, with press." Emily's heart skipped. "You're exposing everything." "Yes, and you're going to lead the confrontation. You're not just a spokesperson for Haven now. You're the face of the resistance." She absorbed that, the weight of it, the risk. "But if we do this," she said, "there's no going back." "There's nothing worth going back to," Nathan said simply. An hour later, the plan was in motion. Emily changed into a charcoal blazer over a black shirt. Nathan's team had already coordinated with a media outlet, arranged for press coverage, and deployed 2 private security teams, one for visibility, one for discretion. She rode in the lead car with Nathan, both silent, both focused. As they approached the restaurant, the street was already humming with activity. News vans had parked discreetly nearby. A few onlookers stood across the street, curious, but inside it was business as usual, until Nathan stepped through the front door. The moment he entered, the air shifted. The hostess at the front barely managed a greeting before going pale. Jason, behind the bar, froze mid-motion. Several waiters stopped in place. glancing from Nathan to each other. Karen emerged from the back, irritation on her face, until she saw who it was. She stepped forward, composed herself quickly, and plastered on a smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Do you have a reservation?" Nathan didn't smile. He turned to Emily. "I believe you were looking for the manager," he said. Karen's expression flickered. Emily stepped forward. "I'd like to speak to the person currently in charge of this location." Karen straightened her posture. "That would be me." "Not anymore," Nathan replied. Gasps rippled across the room. "I'm Nathan Grant," he continued. "I own this building, and I've been watching this operation closely. I've seen how customers are treated. I've seen how staff are silenced. I've seen manipulation, lies, and sabotage." Karen paled, but held her ground. "I don't know what you think you've seen, but this is highly irregular." "Not irregular," Nathan said, exposing the truth. He gestured, and 2 members of a security team entered with cameras rolling. Press members slipped in behind them, microphones raised. Jason muttered something under his breath and slunk away toward the kitchen. Karen tried to speak again, but Emily stepped in front of her. "You try to ruin my name," Emily said. "You lied to corporate. You punished kindness. And you helped funnel information to someone trying to destroy a mission that could help thousands of people." Karen's voice was low and furious. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Emily pulled out one of the documents Nathan had given her. "This is your second signed agreement with a shell company owned by Charles Dempsey. You rerouted supply orders, authorized backdoor surveillance, and even forged reports to paint employees as liabilities. We have it all." Karen looked around. The staff had stopped working. Customers were listening. The cameras caught every flicker of panic across her face. Nathan stepped forward again. "You're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Karen didn't argue. She turned stiffly and walked out with a member of Nathan's team close behind. Emily took a breath. The room was still silent. Then someone clapped. It started with Lily near the drink station. A hesitant, single clap, then another server joined in, then a customer. And suddenly the restaurant was filled with applause. Nathan leaned toward Emily. "You did it." She looked at him. "No, we did." Outside, the crowd was growing. Word had already spread. Emily stepped out of the restaurant, took the mic from a reporter, and looked into the camera. "My name is Emily Carson, and this is only the beginning." The footage of Nathan Grant's public appearance spread across social media and news networks like a spark meeting dry tinder. Within hours, hashtags related to the confrontation trended nationwide. Every major outlet replayed the scene. Nathan walking to the restaurant doors, Emily stepping up to expose Karen, and a final applause that seemed to echo far beyond that single building. But what came next was even more unexpected. By the following morning, Emily found herself facing a flood of requests. Interviews, partnership proposals, keynote invitations. But what struck her most was a stream of messages from former restaurant employees. People who had been mistreated, silenced, or wrongfully terminated across various establishments owned or influenced by Dempsey's network. The common thread in their stories was a chilling one. They had all been punished for small acts of compassion, just like she had. Inside Haven's headquarters, the energy had shifted. The staff worked with renewed purpose, and Emily, no longer just a symbolic figurehead, now sat at the core of every strategic decision. Claire coordinated communications with the legal team. Alan's team expanded surveillance across Nathan's compromised properties, and Emily began shaping the next phase of their mission. That afternoon, Nathan called a closed-door meeting in one of Haven's secure conference rooms. Only 4 people were present: Nathan, Emily, Alan, and Claire. Nathan began with a single sentence. "It's time to escalate." He slid a document across the table. It was a corporate audit commissioned in secret by one of Nathan's private financial officers. The audit detailed large-scale embezzlement, illegal subcontracting, and internal bribes traced back to Dempsey-affiliated administrators. But more shocking than the numbers was a name that appeared multiple times in email correspondences, invoices, and bank transfers. Karen. Emily's jaw tightened. So it wasn't just about protecting the restaurant. She was helping Dempsey sabotage your entire system. Alan nodded grimly. She wasn't just a bad manager. She was a plant. We believe she entered the company years ago under false pretenses, probably one of several. Claire leaned in. The question is, how do we make this public without implicating Nathan's leadership as negligent? We do not shift the blame, Nathan said immediately. This happened under my watch. My withdrawal from the public space gave people like Dempsey room to move in. If we're going to fix this, I have to stand beside it. Emily glanced at him, respect deepening. So we make it part of the story. Nathan met her eyes. Exactly. We show the world how deeply rooted this problem is and how we intend to tear it out. But before any announcement could be made, another twist arrived. Emily's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She stepped out of the conference room to answer. Emily Carson? A man's voice asked. Yes. Who is this? My name is Paul Rivers. I'm a freelance journalist. I've been following your story. She hesitated. Okay. I was investigating a series of nonprofit failures over the past 3 years, and I found something disturbing. Each one had ties to the same holding group that backed your former restaurant's operating company. Emily went still. Go on. The people behind the scenes, most of them anonymous, are all connected to Charles Dempsey. But here's the part one haven't published yet. Months before your suspension, there was an internal memo between Dempsey and a regional executive. It said, the girl from Madison Street might be useful. Keep her close. Emily felt the floor shift under her. They knew who I was before I was suspended? She asked, voice tight. More than that, Paul said. I think they were watching you long before the day you gave that man water. She thanked him and hung up. Her legs felt heavy as she re-entered the conference room. I was targeted, she said, dropping her phone on the table. Not randomly, not after the fact. They had files on me beforehand. They were watching me while I was still just a waitress. Alan frowned. That changes things. Claire looked alarmed. Why would Dempsey care about her before anything happened? Nathan stood slowly. Because she was working at a property I still owned. Because she has a presence, an ability to connect with people, and because Dempsey has always feared what he can't control. Emily felt a shiver of something deeper. What if I wasn't the only one they marked? Nathan turned to Alan. I want a full list of all former employees who've been dismissed under suspicious circumstances at any of our properties. Cross-reference it with known contacts of Dempsey's companies. If this is a pattern, we expose it all. Alan nodded and left immediately. That evening, Nathan met with Emily privately in his penthouse, a quieter atmosphere than the charged office. The skyline glowed behind them, lights flickering like distant stars. There's one more thing, he said after a long pause. I've been working on something in the background, a project that only a few people know about. He handed her a tablet. On the screen was a draft for a nonprofit charter. But this one was different. Not just transitional housing. Not just career placement. It was a foundation built on detection, advocacy, and exposure. Its mission, to protect whistleblowers, investigate corporate sabotage, and defend small organizations vulnerable to systemic abuse. I want you to lead it, Nathan said simply. Emily stared at the screen. The name of the foundation struck her immediately. The Watchlight Initiative. This goes far beyond food service, she murmured. This is about integrity, Nathan said, and making sure what happened to you and others can never happen in silence again. She looked up. Why me? Because you've lived both sides of the fight. You understand the price of silence and the power of truth. You didn't ask for this path, but you never turn away from it. That's the kind of leadership the world needs. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She looked back at the screen. Then let's make it real, she said. They shook hands, not as employer and employee, but as partners in something bigger. Outside, the world continued to debate her story. But inside that room, a new story had already begun. And this time, Emily would be the one writing the first chapter. Emily had barely slept in the days that followed. Her life had entered a new phase, one defined not by mere survival or reactive decisions, but by vision and forward motion. The Watchlight Initiative, still in its formative stage, consumed her waking hours. Its potential felt massive, intimidating even, but every moment of research, planning, and collaboration reinforced the reality that this wasn't just another nonprofit. It was the beginning of a national shift in how systemic abuse and corporate exploitation were challenged. With Nathan's backing, Emily assembled a team of advisors, legal experts, community organizers, and former whistleblowers. She wanted every perspective represented. Meetings ran long into the night, some virtual, others held at Haven. Yet amid all the energy, she never lost sight of the personal dimension. This was still her fight, and she had to own it fully. One morning, Alan called her into a private briefing room inside the Haven building. When she entered, he greeted her with a small nod and gestured to a laptop waiting on the table. On the screen was a list, names, dates, and employment histories. "We finished the audit," Alan said. "Here are the verified former employees across Nathan's properties who were terminated after showing resistance to unethical orders or who raised complaint against site managers connected to Dempsey." Emily leaned in, her breath caught. There were hundreds. She scrolled slowly, reading the brief descriptions. A janitor dismissed after reporting unsafe conditions. A receptionist fired for helping an injured tenant. A night manager removed after exposing inflated expenses. Each entry came with a termination date, and in many cases, a subsequent connection to Dempsey-owned businesses or intermediaries. "This is bigger than I thought," she said quietly. Alan replied, "It's coordinated suppression. For years. But thanks to your statement and the exposure of the Karen incident, some of these people are coming forward again." Emily looked up. "How many?" "So far, over 70 have contacted our hotline. Many are ready to testify publicly." She sat back, stunned. "We're not just building something new. We're pulling back a curtain that's been hiding systemic rot." Alan nodded. "And you're at the center of it." As she walked back to her office, the weight of responsibility deepened. But so did her clarity. This had to go national. Not just a city-wide campaign, not a brief media cycle. A movement. She convened her core team that afternoon. Claire, Alan, 2 advisors from Haven, and a civil rights attorney named Denise Harrow, who had volunteered pro bono support after seeing Emily's interview. "We're organizing a national summit," Emily began, standing before the whiteboard. "1 month from today, it will launch the Watchlight Initiative officially. We'll present the audit. We'll introduce the Whistleblower Network. We'll offer training for communities and businesses committed to integrity." Claire asked, "What kind of venue are you thinking?" Emily didn't hesitate. Seattle Convention Center. Full media coverage. No secrecy. No filters. Alan added, "We'll need security. A lot of it. Dempsey isn't going to sit quietly and let this unfold." Emily nodded. "I'm counting on that." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. While Haven continued operating in the background, the Watchlight Initiative consumed every moment of Emily's schedule. She worked directly with Denise and her legal team to finalize protections for participating whistleblowers. She collaborated with Nathan on funding strategies that would ensure the initiative could survive without being dependent on any one donor or corporation. Nathan, for his part, became increasingly supportive but less visible. He understood that the public needed to see Emily as the leader, not his shadow. Their calls became more strategic, their conversations less about supervision and more about vision. It was during one of those late-night calls that Nathan told her something she would never forget. "You were never supposed to be a footnote in someone else's story, Emily. You were meant to be the headline." She wrote those words on the inside of her notebook. Every time she felt overwhelmed, she would look at them and remember the curb outside that restaurant, the weight of the cup of water, the risk that felt so small then, but which had transformed everything. 2 weeks before the summit, something unexpected happened. She received an envelope delivered to Haven's front desk, no return address. Inside was a simple card with handwritten words. "I was one of the 3. I never thought I'd see this day. A friend." Emily read it 3 times. Then she looked up at Claire. "There were 3 of us, 3 who passed Nathan's test. This is from one of the others." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Do we know who they are?" Emily shook her head. "Nathan never told me. He said I'd meet them when the time was right. The idea that others had gone through similar trials and made similar choices made her feel less alone, but also more determined. Whoever the others were, wherever they had been placed, they had also carried this mission in silence, but not for much longer. With 5 days to go until the summit, Emily received a final confirmation. The city had approved all permits and the venue had been secured. Dozens of national organizations had signed on as partners. Media outlets were already previewing the event, teasing segments like The Rise of Watchlight and From Waitress to Watchdog, Emily Carson's journey. One night, unable to sleep, Emily walked through the nearly completed setup at the convention center. Crews were finishing the stage, adjusting lighting, testing audio. Banners hung from the ceiling, bright, clean, and simple. The Watchlight emblem, a torch encircled by open hands, glowed above the main podium. She stepped onto the stage alone. In the silence of the room, she imagined the seats filled with people, survivors, workers, journalists, students, executives. She thought about everything that had brought her here. The moment she hesitated with the cup of water, the reprimand, the name on a napkin, the warning message, the eviction notice, the dockside meeting. And now, she was no longer reacting. She was leading. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Let them come." Because in 5 days, the world would watch. And for once, it would listen. The morning of the summit arrived beneath a crystal-clear Seattle sky. There was a briskness in the air that seemed to sharpen everything. The sound of car horns, the voices of people gathering outside the convention center, the nervous murmurs behind the curtains where organizers moved with focused purpose. Emily stood backstage, dressed in a simple navy blue suit. Her hair was pinned neatly, but a few strands refused to stay in place, framing her face with a quiet honesty that matched her presence. In her hand, she held the speech she had rewritten a dozen times, though she knew now she wouldn't use it. Claire approached, headset in place, clipboard in hand. It's time. The house is packed. Live stream is active. Every major outlet's watching. Emily nodded, and Nathan, already seated front row. He wants this moment to be yours. Emily smiled faintly. It's ours. All of ours. As she stepped onto the stage, the crowd rose in a quiet wave of applause, not roaring but steady, powerful. Before her stood a sea of faces. Community leaders, media personnel, government representatives, former service workers, social advocates, and people who had once been like her, unseen, unheard, surviving in silence. She reached the podium and took a moment to breathe. The lights were warm, the cameras red-dotted and waiting, but her focus was fixed only on the human beings in front of her. I didn't plan to be here, she began. In fact, when this journey started, I was just someone trying to do the right thing in a world that often punishes people for doing the right thing. The room was silent. I was suspended from my job for handing a cup of water to someone the world had decided was disposable. That moment, quiet, almost invisible, set into motion a chain of events I never could have imagined. I was pushed out, discredited, silenced. She paused, scanning the crowd. But instead of staying silent, I chose to speak. And when I did, something incredible happened. People listened, not because I shouted louder than everyone else, but because what I had to say resonated with a truth so many already felt, that we are long overdue for a system that protects those who choose decency, that we must confront the ways power is abused, not just in boardrooms, but in kitchens, in offices, in shelters, and on sidewalks. She turned slightly toward the side of the stage, where a screen lit up with the Watchlight Initiative's emblem. That's what the Watchlight Initiative is about. It's not just a nonprofit. It's a promise to defend integrity, to protect whistleblowers, to give voice to those who were silenced not for doing wrong, but for refusing to stay quiet in the face of wrong. Applause swelled, then quieted again as she continued. In the past weeks, we've uncovered a trail of abuse, manipulation, and coordinated retaliation stretching back years. We've gathered testimony from over 160 individuals across 12 cities. And we're not done. She looked into the camera, now, eyes steady. To those who think they can exploit without consequence, watch what happens when people stand together. To those who fear they are alone in their fight, know that you're not. And to the ones who are still deciding whether to speak, whether to act, whether to believe in something better, I hope today gives you your answer. She stepped back slightly from the podium as applause rose again, this time louder, carrying energy that filled the hall. A short video played next, a compilation of stories from people affected by systemic retaliation. A teacher fired for advocating for students, a nurse who exposed dangerous hospital policies, a factory worker who reported unsafe conditions. Each story ended with the same phrase, "Watchlight heard me." After the video, Emily returned to the stage to introduce two individuals who, until today, had remained unnamed. The other two who had passed Nathan's original test. The first, a former grocery store clerk named Myra, had refused to destroy a homeless man's belongings during a property sweep and was fired for insubordination. She was now a regional coordinator for Haven, overseeing food distribution programs. The second, a young maintenance worker named Samir, had been dismissed after blowing a whistle on landlords using forged inspection reports. With Watchlight's help, he was now preparing a class action lawsuit that could change how housing inspections were regulated statewide. They stood beside Emily on stage, and the symbolism was not lost on anyone watching. 3 ordinary people, 3 acts of compassion, 3 voices that had been ignored. Until now, when the formal summit concluded, media flooded the main floor, but Emily slipped away from the lights, out a side corridor where Nathan waited, leaning casually against the wall, hands in his pockets. "You've come a long way from that sidewalk," he said. She smiled. "So have you." He walked beside her down the hall, their steps slow, reflective. "I watched the whole speech," he said. "You need a script." "No," she agreed. "I just needed to remember why I started." They exited into a quiet garden behind the convention center. The city hummed just beyond the trees, but here it felt still, peaceful. "You said once that I passed a test," Emily said softly, "but it never felt like a test to me. It felt like a moment that demanded a choice." Nathan nodded. "That's all any test really is." They stood in silence for a moment. Then he added, "You've taken this further than I ever imagined. It's yours now, Emily. All of it." She turned to him. "No, it's everyone's. That's the point." He smiled, then reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Sometimes the smallest acts reveal the greatest character. "Thank you for seeing me." It was dated from the day she had handed him the water. She looked up, eyes full. "I kept it," he said, "all this time, because it reminded me of the world we're trying to build." She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her jacket. As they returned to the building, people turned to greet them, staff, reporters, strangers offering thanks. But Emily no longer felt like a woman caught in something too big for her. She was leading it. 1 year later, on a spring afternoon not unlike the one that had changed everything, Emily stood on stage again. This time as the CEO of the Watchlight Foundation, now operating in 15 cities across the country. Behind her were dozens of team members. In the crowd were individuals whose lives had been transformed, whose voices had finally found amplification. And somewhere, seated near the back, quiet but watching with quiet pride, was Nathan Grant. She met his eyes, nodded once, then turned back to the microphone. Her voice carried clearly. "This is only the beginning." And everyone listening believed it.